Everyone, for my topic over the last few weeks, I have been researching the Civil War in Scott County, Missouri. While such an unknown location is nothing more than a passing thought, living in the southern parts of Missouri was quite a struggle for the everyday families. Throughout my presentation, I have chose to use several photos of my own that I have taken while traveling for my research in order to better illustrate the importance of exploring one's own local history. Here is my agenda for this video. Pause if you would like to review. We will first review a basic timeline of general events pertaining to the county. We will then break down the timeline and present that as presented in the agenda here. Lastly, I will be discussing some of the important resources that I used in order to obtain some of my current sources. Here is an extremely general timeline of Scott County during the Civil War. In 1861, not long after the Civil War began, families began to split up and people began to move south in order to support the Confederacy. While Missouri was considered to be a Union state, the region was so far south that a large portion of the population strongly believed in the system of slavery. Not long after, guerrilla attacks began to occur from the Confederate rogue soldiers. Many people's property was burned down or destroyed. In 1862, General Nathaniel Watkins reached out to President Lincoln about the damages that were done to his own property directly outside of Benton, Missouri, by rogue Union soldiers. Lincoln, who was disappointed by such behavior, reached out to St. Louis officials and ordered for the immediate rebuild of Watkins' estate. In 1863, Commerce began to be used as a major port for Union soldiers. Several different documents support the countless times when Commerce was packed full of Union soldiers. By 1864, guerrilla attacks had gotten so bad that Scott County was forced to move their courthouse from Benton to Commerce. Due to a string of fires on major businesses and even the courthouse itself, the county government had no choice but to move the remaining documents to a safer location. Even by the end of the war in 1865, many families still struggled with the division and heartbreak over this political difference. During the Civil War, Confederate camps were located in areas such as Sikeston or New Madrid, areas as close as 35 miles away from Benton. During transit between major battles, many rogue soldiers took pleasure in burning down or causing damage to minor Union towns such as Benton, Commerce, or Hamburg. Among available documents, there are several reported instances of major damage that occurred, some incidences even crippling the economy. Some of these include the Parrott Mill or the Church of Hamburg. The Parrott Mill in Benton was a major outlet for grain and other food-related needs. Unfortunately, it was reported that due to it being burned down, many areas like Scott County were now dependent on St. Louis for their imports. By car, St. Louis is roughly 2 hours away from Benton. Imagine living in a time where you weren't able to travel 70 miles per hour up the interstate. Another major example was the destruction of the Hamburg Catholic Church. When Hamburg was first established, the founders of the town were all Catholic, and they chose to build a church in the center of their small town. After 5 years of backbreaking labor from the entire town, they managed to build their beautiful church. In one night, with just a few rogue Confederate soldiers, half a decade's worth of work was burned to the ground. Not only this, but the attack had managed to empty the entire town. 13 men were captured, many were killed or severely injured. Anyone who managed to escape did not stick around until the Union troops had showed up. One Union captain recalls that the town was completely empty by the time their arrival and was filled with nothing but destruction. Edison Shrum, a major historian in the Scott County community, has written about several occurrences throughout the Civil War such as these in his published works. This comment was by Confederate Brig General M. Jeff Thompson following the destruction of the Hamburg Catholic Church. He stated that the temptation of having a brush before leaving was too great, and that charge into the town of Hamburg, scattering the Dutch in all directions. Many unplanned attacks such as these occurred. The event in particular was one of the most discussed events in Scott County history. This attack resulted in a decade's worth of work at rebuilding the small town. Unplanned attacks such as these are not only discouraged Scott County civilians from staying in the area, but many people lost loved ones and their estates. Each attack was a minor victory for the Confederates, and an undeserved one at that. This one in particular, Thompson had sent his men out only to find transportation for them to get back to Whitewater. Unfortunately, these men just so happened to stumble across Hamburg, and as he said, the temptation was too great for them to just leave. It's an unfortunate event for such a small town. Who was Nathaniel Watkins? Watkins was a brigadier general for the Confederate Army and a large plantation owner full of over 40 slaves. He owned approximately 1,200 acres of land directly outside of Benton, Missouri. Before joining the military, Watkins grew up in Kentucky and moved to Transylvania College, where he studied to become a lawyer. In 1819, he graduated with his license to practice law and moved to Jackson, Missouri, where he eventually began to do so. He had many successes that led to his fame. He was a 3-time military veteran for the Mexican-American War, the War of 1812, and the Civil War. He also founded the small town of Morley, Missouri. He was even a member of the Missouri Senate and the Speaker of the Missouri House of Representatives. His land was eventually turned into a conservation area that you can still visit today. During the Civil War, General Watkins wrote a fairly famous letter to Lincoln. While many of the guerrilla attacks that occurred were from the Confederate rogue soldiers, Union soldiers did cause damage as well. In the later months of 1862, Union members destroyed a majority of Watkins' estate and burned down his home that was located directly outside of Benton. As a result of this, he wrote a letter directly to Lincoln asking for assistance with the issue and wanting safety for his family. In response to his letter, Lincoln ordered for St. Louis officials to rebuild as much of the estate as possible. His property was granted immunity and left alone for the duration of the war. And if you take a look at this photo over here, this is actually one of the letters that I think he had wrote to Lincoln. And you can find any of them on the Library of Congress website. General Watkins Conservation Area was not named after him in remembrance of Nathaniel Watkins, but because it was in fact his own plantation. In 1979, nearly 100 years after his death, the local government began to purchase his property. The government slowly purchased his property up until 1991. This was when the conservation area was established. While it is government-owned, the Watkins Family Cemetery is located on the edge of the property. The small cemetery is monitored and maintained by the county regularly, and his tombstone still stands tall and in immaculate condition. Towards the middle of the war, Union troops began to take advantage of Commer's location and would leave troops there to stage attacks on surrounding Confederate areas. As a result of the town's increased use, Union officials eventually evacuated locals to a nearby area until the end of the war. Commerce Historical Society offers copies of Joseph Anderson, a local shopkeeper's diary, for sale. In his diary, he recalls several times when the town was packed full of Union troops. Once, the town was loaded with over 6,000 soldiers in preparation for an attack that was going to occur in New Madrid. Another instance was when Sarah Everson prevented a surprise attack on the city of Alton's Union steamer. Confederate soldiers captured the civilian population of Commerce, hid them away, and waited in secret for the city of Alton to arrive. Everson managed to free herself from her ties, sneak away, and signal the steamer to dock in the town. As a result, the essential Union steamer evaded the Confederate attack. And this photo here is actually a postcard that was received to her family from the government thanking her for her dedication. Towards the end of the war, Scott County officials chose to relocate the courthouse from Benton to Commerce due to several attacks in Benton. A guerrilla attack by rogue Confederates caused the destruction of parts of Scott County courthouse, and many important county documents were destroyed as a result. In 1864, the courthouse was moved to Commerce, where less attacks were occurring due to the increased inhabitants of Union troops. After the courthouse was moved back to Benton, the building was eventually used as a school until 1896, when it was torn down and rebuilt. This is a photo of the new replacement building and where the original courthouse once sat. The building was used in town as a school until the 1970s, where it has left abandoned since. While Scott County offers several places to obtain resources on its history, some of the most essential places that I went to were Commerce and Scott City Museums. The Commerce Historic Society has the museum located at what was once a small church and keeps documentation on the history of Commerce and its surrounding areas. It also has several donated artifacts and exhibits that anyone is welcome to review. I have a photo of the building below. The Scott City Historic Society has a modern building that is located in the middle of town. The museum is full of artifacts donated from all around Scott City, Missouri. The museum itself is run by the Scott City Mayor on the weekends, and when it is open is typically maintained by volunteers of the Scott City Historic Society. It has a rich archive that is full of books written by several different local historians and several primary documents. The photo below is actually of the town's beloved train car that was once a part of the town's train station. While local museums are an excellent choice for research, Edison Shrum has become one of the most reliable sources on the history of the area. But who was Edison Shrum? Shrum is one of the most famous local historians in Scott County. Although having no formal education, he managed to publish 9 books on history of Scott County and the surrounding areas, and has become the most referenced historian around, many of his publications selling well over $100 each. You can even research him on Amazon to reference the general cost of his books. While his publications are expensive and hard to come by, every archive in the surrounding area has several copies of his works. Shrum and these museums are essential to the research of this topic, and it is important to explore local historical sites and museums in order to get a stepping stone towards learning about your own popular local historian. Here is my bibliography. Pause if you would like to review. Thank you all for watching.